Everybody, we're so happy to welcome you to the Ward4 Alliance Education Alliance School Board Candidate Day. We're grateful to Powell. They have been amazing hosts. They've even come through when we didn't have the sound system we thought we were going to bring. So many thanks to Powell. And thank you to Councilmember Todd. Yes. Denise to Powell. Denise, no. I'm too nervous. Stand up. This is our principal.
Principal here at Powell Bilingual. Welcome to our campus. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you need to use the restroom, exiting out of this door to the left, ladies' restroom, and to the right are the men's restroom, just in case you need them. And again, welcome. Our home is your home. So thank you for being here.
Ms. Lyons, thank you. So we're going to get started. The Word4 Education Alliance has been going on for 5 or 6 years. We meet every month in a different one of our Ward4 neighborhoods, DCPS neighborhood schools, and we welcome you all here. We will be taping this event, and we'll put it up on our website so that you can circulate it. And with that, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Rachel Cohen, who is a local education reporter, and she gratefully to us agreed to do this moderating. She has written for the City Paper, for the Atlantic, for the Washington Post, and for many national newspapers. Here she is.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I know we've had a lot of election things this week, and so I think everyone is a real trooper for doing that this week. But it's a really important election, and we have 4 great candidates who are all going to introduce themselves and give brief statements about why they're running, and just sort of to give a preview of what's to come. We're going to go through a few questions that every candidate is going to have the opportunity to respond to, and then we're going to open up the forum for some audience questions, and you are free to ask questions to 1 or 2 candidates. It doesn't have to be every single candidate responds to every question when we get to that portion. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Rhonda.
Hi, thank you, Rachel, and thank you, everyone, for coming this evening. It's a pleasure to see so many familiar faces in the audience. We have been fighting for high-quality schools together for many years, and so I'm so delighted that you've come out for this forum, that I have an opportunity to introduce myself. Thank you so much to the principal who is hosting us, and to our little people who also came out this evening. As Rachel said, my name is Rhonda Henderson. I am delighted to be here to express my undying support for our public schools, both our traditional and our charter schools, and also to share why I have put heart and action together to advocate for our children, our families, our educators, and our advocacy community to realize the school system that we know we have the possibility to achieve here in our ward. So with that, I look forward to a great conversation, to getting to know everybody through your questions and your comments, and I will pass this on to Mr. O'Leary next to me.
Good evening. I'll second what Rhonda said about thanking everybody. I'm Fraser O'Leary. I retired in 2017 after teaching for 47 years in DC public schools. The first 7 years at Garner-Patterson Junior High School, and then in 1977 I moved to Ward 4. I live on Farragut Street, right across from West. And I started teaching in September of 1977, and I retired in June of 2017. I loved every minute of my 47 years. I'm also an adjunct professor at University of the District of Columbia. I've been there for 35 years. still working with DCPS as a consultant for AP. On my campaign material, it says I'm a parent. I am. I have 5 children. They're all grown now, and they're doing very well. My son Ryan, where's Ryan? Ryan is in the back. He's a proud graduate of West Elementary and Hardy Middle School and Wilson High School. But the only reason that I want to be a part of the State Board of Education is to make sure that all of the students in the District of Columbia are treated equally. And I want to make sure that I'm also an advocate for the board gaining power. So that's why I'm doing this after retiring in 2017.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Eleni Lawrence. I'm very happy that you're all here to meet all of us. And I want to give a special shout out to my family, my parents, and my brother who are also here. I am a native Washingtonian DCPS graduate. I'm an educator with 22 years of experience at all levels, elementary, middle school, high school, and now I work in adult basic education. And I'm a parent of 2 boys, 1 in elementary school and 1 in middle school, who are in DC schools. So for me, I'm here because I'm concerned about equity issues in our city. I'm concerned about supporting our educators because we know that our teachers are leaving and we want to make sure that we're supporting them so that they stay and can do the amazing work that we know that they're capable of doing. And we want to make sure that our families and our parents are very involved in policy decisions that are made here in the district. So those are the reasons why I'm running for the State Board of Education to represent Ward 4.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ryan Tariainen. I am a resident of the Tacoma neighborhood here in Ward 4. And education and children are simply my life. It's been my entire life's work. Ever since I left college, I've been in education. I started off as a public school teacher. I've been in public schools the entire time that I've been working, and moved up from being a teacher after getting outstanding results to being an assistant principal in the Woodridge neighborhood in Northeast DC, then a principal both in Southwest and Northwest. My teaching career started in Southeast. So as you can notice, I've been in all quadrants of DC and meeting kids from all over. And it's those kids that really inspired me to run for this position today. It was when I was a principal and later moved up into the district office level, parents that I had supported, both their children themselves, really pushed me to run for this election when we found out that it was going to be open because they thought my voice needed to be heard. There is not currently a school leader on the Board of Education here in DC. I was a principal for 4 years, and in 2016 I was DC's Principal of the Year. So I have the principal's voice that I think is needed, that I want to provide. I'm really proud of the district for electing 3 educators to the Board of Education this week. All former teachers, people who still work in education in DC. We definitely needed to see more of that on our board. And now I want us to make sure that we can add that school leader voice, who would be able to add the real world experience to the conversations the board are having right now about teacher retention and how to boost test scores, how to support teachers. I want to make sure that that voice and that experience is heard, and I'm happy to share that all with you tonight. Thank you for coming.
Can we have a round of applause for all of the kids? Okay, without further ado, we're just going to get right into it. So I think what we'll do is maybe for the first question, we'll start back with Ryan and then we'll go, different things. Okay. So the first question is, how will you educate families and staff about what the State Board of Education does and opportunities for advocacy? How might you go beyond that function and inform and empower families and staff to have their voices heard in all the different ways that DC governs its schools?
Thank you. That's a great question. Feedback. Okay. As I've been campaigning, and even before I started campaigning, something that I've been very passionate about doing is attending local community meetings in the district. Whether those be the ANC meetings, I'm part of 4B, But I've also started to attend 4A and even the 3-4G and et cetera. Those meetings, in addition to parent-teacher organizations at our local public schools, both charter and DCPS, are things that can be open to the public, and especially something that can be open to the person who's elected to this position. As far as I know, they're not necessarily being attended by our board members and the State Board of Education, which I think is a shame, because it's a perfect opportunity to engage with people who are concerned in the community, parents, and even people who maybe not have children in schools right now, but are still concerned. As I've attended those meetings and talked to people, there's definitely a thirst to make sure that a representative from the State Board of Education, whether it be the actual member or someone who works with them, give a report, just like people who work for Councilmember Todd do, or for Mayor Muriel Bowser do. I don't understand why the State Board of Education doesn't do the same thing. We need to make sure everyone's informed. And beyond that, just making sure you're a really visible member of the community, so that parents and citizens alike know that they can depend on you to advocate for their kids, and to spread the good news of what's happening in DC, but also be brave enough to spread the things that we can't be quite proud of yet, and tell them what our solutions are going to be. So just making sure that we have that open ear, that we're making ourselves available and extremely visible, so that we can be known in the communities. People know both your face and your name.
I think this is a great question. Like I said before, it's very important for me to have families' voices in our policy decisions. And so as your State Board of Education member, I would continue to be involved in family work. Part of that is the work that I personally do, working in family engagement, where I work with families every day to educate them about our education system here in the district, both sectors, as well as serving on the Parent Advisory Council for my school DC and spreading information about how that system works to families. I would echo Ryan's sentiment about attending community meetings, as well as meetings that are associated with specific schools and other organizations, just to make sure that you are touching the wide range of families that are here in our schools. Additionally, I think it's important to do additional outreach, because we know that we have a very diverse ward and we have many families that are non-native English speakers, and there's more work that can be done to making sure that their voices are also heard in these decisions that are made. And finally, I would say that all residents and all parents have a voice in our local government, and part of the job of the State Board of Education member would be to help educate residents as to how they can make sure that their concerns are met by the appropriate person, whether that be, to their council member or their local ANC, but that would also be how I would work with families.
Those of us who are parents know how important it is, and all we care about is our children. When I win, I will be in schools every day. I don't know if that's part of the job description. I don't know if you know how much the Board of Education member makes for the year, but it's not quite a living wage by any stretch of the imagination. But I've got nothing but time. And I'm going to be in the schools every day. And because I know how important it is. I taught at Garner-Patterson and at Cardozo, and we would never have this many people at a PTA meeting. And some schools have 5 times as many people as this at a PTA meeting. And I think it's incumbent upon the person, it's the Board of Education. It's supposed to be setting the whole guidelines for how education works in this city, and that's what I'm going to do when I'm elected.
Thank you. Parent engagement is a deep passion for me, because I observed how parents had been excluded from the conversation and from decisions that are so pivotal to their child's future. So when I joined the school leadership team at DC Prep, parent engagement was one of my main priorities. And so for over 6 years, I've introduced new strategies to make the school more welcoming and to make our school leaders more accessible to parents. So that included introducing First Cup there is nothing like your first cup of coffee, right? So we would set up coffee outside and attract parents to come in and make sure that school leaders were accessible. Additionally, in my role, I also provided a newsletter to families, and we did that in accessible language. As I've been talking with principals, the first thing that they said in terms of parent engagement was making the language and the reading accessible. So I would be sure to translate the policy and the projects that we are endeavoring to take on into language that is friendly to parents and showcases our most important function, of course, which is developing children. So they'll be able to draw a straight line between what we're doing at the state board and how it's going to impact their children. Additionally, in my work in the Citizens Association, I've made a concerted effort to knock on doors at our public schools and say, hey, we're the Citizens Association, we want to support you, and we invite them into our meetings. We take time to listen to their concerns, and then we also go back to the schools. So as the State Board of Education representative, I would certainly apply those same strategies to building relationships with parents, inviting their voices in, and then also having a conversation about how we can build a great relationship to achieve this kind of schools that we want. Thank you.
This question was submitted by a Ward4 parent. Our DCPS schools in Ward4 reflect some of the struggles of our city, which is a history of racial and economic segregation. They can be seen as a risk to attend despite significant gains and the individual experience of many of the current families. This has been a painful and frustrating reality for the community. While this has been exacerbated by the single ratings for schools which the board voted on and approved, it still reflects a larger issue of resistance to diversity, in fact, while embracing it in theory. What might you do as a school board member to address this resistance to diversity and the legacy of segregation in DCPS? We will start with
You mentioned the rating system. Are we going to have a question about that later?
we are maybe from the audience.
Oh, okay. One of the things that's happening in DC is exhibited by this building. We have a lot of new edifices all over the city. But the population for the public schools is going up now, as said in the paper this morning. But there's plenty of room in the schools for more students. The equality of education in the city doesn't exist, right? There are schools that have viable parent organizations that are able to bring in teachers to teach specific subjects, to bring in supplies and equipment for those, and there are schools that aren't able to have those kinds of opportunities, let's say. Now, if that has to do with the segregation of there is a segregation, but it's not necessarily we think segregation, we think racial segregation. It's not necessarily racial segregation. It may be economic segregation. I mean, our city is changing dramatically. Cardozo, if you walk around Cardozo's neighborhood, you don't see the same people that you used to see 10 years ago. And we have to take that into consideration on the State Board of Education to make sure that those schools that don't have those viable organizations that can upgrade their systems are taken care of by the system.
So we were going to ask a question about improving equity, but I guess what might you say to the question of resistance to diversity that is happening? How might you address the fact that it seems like there's still a resistance to integration in the city?
That's interesting, but I mean, like Cardozo, 10 years ago was about 95% African American, and Cardozo now is 50% Latino, right? But Cardozo has absorbed that change. And I think as the neighborhoods are changing much more quickly than the schools are changing as far as the diversity. So I think that's sort of an open question that we'll see what happens in neighborhoods in another 5 or 6 years, especially at the high school level. But I know that at the early childhood level, that integration is already happening.
I think that one of the things that you have to be able to do is have conversations and have conversations that are at times difficult. The issues that we're dealing with in our schools, some of them are not new. Some of these issues are historic issues that have been around in schools since before I was in school. And there has always been a school that is predominantly white, predominantly black. These are not new issues. What we see is that the city, as Fraser has stated, is changing again, is in the process of change. But as you look at each individual school population, you see some schools that have show extreme diversity, some schools that don't, some schools that are evolving in different ways. But what I think that what's important to do is to have honest conversations about schools within the schools, right? It's not necessarily a citywide conversation or a ward-wide conversation, because it becomes a school community conversation, and that's how you keep. That's how you build community, is by having those conversations on those micro levels.
As I've been walking around the ward and talking with families and community members, both of multiple ethnicities, white families, black families, Latino families, the common thread is that we all want great schools. That is absolutely what every parent wants from every walk of life across our very diverse ward. It is true that some families will say, well, if I see that a school is a predominantly one ethnicity, what's the community going to be like? It is the role of the State Board of Education to advance courageous conversations that say we are in a community together, and this is how we are going to build strong relationships. There are organizations within our ward and also within the city that advance equity and also help people to build relationships across difference. So as a state board member, I would be a leader in facilitating those conversations. I've already had them in one-offs where people have said, hey Rhonda, you know, this is how I really feel about this issue. And people are able to share that with me because I just listen. And there's no judgment in their perspective. We're all learning how to navigate this new territory, especially when it comes to schools where people have so much heart and skin in the game. And so the State Board of Education member and the leader for Ward 4 has to be that person that sees our members' hearts, that sees what our constituents are really saying at heart, and are able to navigate that terrain that has been tricky, but we're able to get past it when we're able to see this is fundamentally what all of us believe, and we are genuinely coming from a good place. And I look forward to having more courageous conversations with our constituents in the service of our children and in service of our community.
So I definitely echo the idea of courageous conversations, and I think we need to take a moment to be courageous right now. The reason why we have a problem with resistance to diversity is because of racism. Point blank. It still exists, even in our city today. We have to acknowledge that. We have to own it. We have to solve it. I led a diverse school. I was very proud that I had students of all ethnicities at my school. It was a little utopia because it was an early childhood school. So kids weren't having a lot of discussions or noticing a lot about race yet. But I know that that's going to happen when they get older, and they're going to be inundated with prejudice and the media. And we have to intercept it, and we have to understand our own biases that we have as adults to help kids not have those biases when they become adults. Studies show that diversity in schools is one of the most critical ways that you can grow scores. Just diversity alone can grow scores. And yet, our schools in DC are more segregated now than they were before Brown v. Board of Education, if you can even imagine that. I've led PD on courageous conversations on race with my teachers who are of all ethnicities. I did it not just by myself, but with another colleague of mine who's an African American female. And together we led 4 different sessions that we've actually replicated for other departments and other schools in order to have these conversations. We need to coordinate with other of our people in our community to make sure that these conversations are happening so that we can acknowledge them. Just this evening, I talked to a citizen who's in the audience who was telling me that she's trying to host conversations between Caucasian and African American citizens to make sure that we're discussing these, having these conversations, discussing these problems, coming together as a community. That's the exact type of grassroots organization that we need to do, not just for our schools, but for Washington, D.C. in general.
Thank you. So this is going to be a little more specific. But I would like you to describe one policy, be it a budget item or a policy that you would to focus on specifically to improve equity in the public schools. Who goes? Lee.
So when we talk about equity in our schools, the one thing that we can do is just listen to the students and listen to what they're saying. And they talk and they know that some schools have a lot more and some schools have a lot less. For example, let's talk about technology. And we know how vital technology is in these day and age and how important it is for our students to become college and career ready. But when we don't have the adequate technology and the support for the technology in our schools, it makes it very challenging. Not to mention that now that the PARCC testing is on computers, then that just adds another level of where students need to have that opportunity to interact day-to-day with technology in order to show that they are performing and proficient.
Is there a specific technology that computers, or is there, can you be a little more specific?
So I'm saying one way to ensure equity is to make sure that in all of our schools that we have the access to the technology needed at all levels, so the students are able to have that experience, and it's not also only for a high stakes testing situation.
So there's a lot of different policy items that we can enact to promote equity. One that comes to mind for me actually stems from a conversation that I had recently with a parent at Tacoma Education Campus. And we were talking about the different levels of fundraising that parent associations are able to do for their schools, just depending on where that school is located, because of the socioeconomic status of that neighborhood. So for instance, if we're looking at DCPS, a school like Janey Elementary, they raise hundreds of thousands of dollars every year, their parents do, because they're very affluent and they're able to do that, which is wonderful. But then you look at schools across the east of the river like C.W. Harris, and they have budgets of almost $0. It's not equitable. We already know that our schools aren't equitable to begin with the type of education that we're able to provide, but we're adding fuel to the fire with these disproportionate funds that are being raised at the school level. And so the thing that we talked about is this idea that's happening right now actually in Montgomery County, Maryland, where the school district is putting a cap on the amount of money that can be raised, and extra funds are divvied up for their schools that are not as affluent, so that they can have a fighting chance to have those extra positions, to have that new technology, to have the after-school programs that their affluent peers are getting to have every single day. If we don't put those policies in place, it will continue to be inequitable. That's probably my first idea for that.
I think that the Board of Education should be a mover and having equity throughout the city. That the conversations at the State Board of Education's meetings should be talking about how we can be proactive about making schools equal. Because what Ryan was saying about the inequality, we know that there's an inequality as far as incomes throughout the city. And that there are all kinds of things that the schools aren't equal in. But I think that the State Board of Education should be proactive in helping the citizens know about the inequalities and being a voice for the citizens to make sure that those things are changed.
Is there a specific policy or a budget item that you in particular want to focus on?
I could go back to the technology. When we started the park testing at Cardozo, we didn't have enough computers for the students to be able to take the test at the same time. And that was in the new building. We have all these new buildings, but not all of the new buildings had the same amount of technology.
So I would touch on a couple things. One, our attendance policies can disfavor children who are coming from very difficult or disadvantaged circumstances. So for example, specifically the 80-20 rule, that if you miss 20% of the day, then you're actually marked absent. And that is really, it disadvantages children who perhaps are traveling from long distances. We know that our children travel across the board to go to different schools. We also know that our families sometimes come from very difficult environments. Someone might describe them as dysfunctional environments. So one of the ways that the State Board of Education can actually address that is by taking a very rigorous look at our attendance policies. Our graduation policies that offer more flexible pathways to graduation open that door wider for children who may not be in school every day following the curriculum and the assignments exactly as stated, because again, their life circumstances may draw them away from school because of the situation into which they were born. The State Board of Education can take a leadership role in establishing equity by advocating for children who may not know, oh, I actually can graduate in a different way. And then finally, we can increase our budget so that school leaders don't feel compelled to spend their at-risk dollars on things outside of children who are actually at risk. So if we look at our attendance policies, our graduation policies, and increase our budget, then I think that I know that we will certainly advance equity in our public school system.
Thank you. So the next question is around the master's facility plan, which is sort of the city looking ahead next 10 years, looking at enrollment population projections and figuring out where schools should go and be cited in all the different wards. And so I wanted to give you all an opportunity to weigh in about how you're thinking about that. Do you, particularly a big question is the role of preserving neighborhood schools as we also open charter schools. And I think hearing from all of you about how we should be, the role of parents weighing in on that process, but also how you're thinking about the growth and balance of those two sectors with taking into account the changing demographics of the city would be great. Ryan, do you want to start?
So when we bring up the idea of the master facility plan, just as Rachel had mentioned, the topic of traditional DCPS schools and public charter schools comes up. Full disclosure, I currently work for a charter school. I've worked in charter schools in DC for about 8 years. And one of the things that I talked about actually just 2 days ago, or was it yesterday, at a charter school meeting for all of Ward 4. So the DC Public Charter School Board was hosting a meeting for Ward 4 families about charter schools. And this came up, and a solution that came up because of these concerns was about giving some preference to people who apply for these charter schools, which often pop up in buildings that once were owned by DCPS. Giving preference to families who live in the neighborhood. So what they would call like a neighborhood zone preference, so that those families would not feel pushed out or feel like they have fewer choices, or that they're really competing with a very difficult lottery in order for their child to attend a great school that's walking distance. That's not being done right now, and I think that would help to ease a lot of people's concerns so that they can attend the school that they're zoned for, certainly for DCPS, but if they so choose, to have that neighborhood preference for a charter school that's walking distance.
Yes, as we think about our neighborhood schools, and of course, every parent wants a high-quality, by-right school for their child. Like, that is absolutely no question. If you talk to parents, and I do every day, that's all they want. And if they're looking for something else, they're looking for programs or something special for their child, but they should always have an excellent by-right school. So preserving our neighborhood schools is essential. We also do have buildings that need to be offered to charter schools when they start their charter. Because the other issue that happens is charters not having the space and then moving, and I agree with what Ryan was mentioning about also the possibility of having neighborhood preference options for charter schools, because what we find is that most families, one of their top priorities for the schools that they're looking for is a school that is in close proximity to their home. And that is even through the My School DC process, when people are applying for schools, that is usually what they're applying for. And the school that's closest to them might not necessarily be their neighborhood by right school.
For both of you, do you know why we don't currently have the neighborhood preference, or what might be a barrier or prevent that from becoming a reality for our charter?
Yes, so when the legislation was written and the policies were first written in the late 90s, they had it was an idea full of integrity to make it so that these lotteries were equally open to anyone who happened to live in the District of Columbia, because everyone is a taxpayer and they should be able to attend a charter school no matter where they live at an equal opportunity, which I think there's a lot of substance behind. But then we get into these other arguments. So now there's a talk about maybe coming somewhere in the middle of having this neighborhood preference that's a very close proximity to the school, so it doesn't completely disregard having that equitable lottery.
One of the problems that we have, and Ryan alluded to it when he went to a charter school board meeting, is that we have all of these different organizations. I don't know if you're aware that all the charter schools have their own boards of education. And there's also a singular board that goes over and makes some kind of decisions about the charter schools. And there's the State Board of Education, which is in charge of the public schools and the public charter schools. And in order for our school system, all the students in the District of Columbia to become what we want it to become, there has to be some kind of a singular vehicle that moves it. And I think that's one of the biggest problems, because I don't know how many of you didn't win the lottery. I'm not talking about the Powerball or anything like that. But it's a lottery. You know, our children shouldn't be forced to be part of a lottery. They should. I'm a neighborhood school person. I think that I taught in a neighborhood school for a long time, and you know, children look forward to coming to Cardozo because their parents went to Cardozo, or their sisters and brothers, aunts and uncles went to Cardozo, and there's a lot of validity to that. So I think that we have to have a singular vehicle that controls how students are allowed to go to school.
Rachel, your question started with referencing the master's facilities plan, so I wanted to touch on that just a little bit. And also just share anecdotally that facilities have always been important to me since I was a kid. It sounds a little weird, but when you're a child, you want to play on a nice playground. And when I compare the playgrounds that I played on as a child and the ones that I saw around the city, that was my introduction to Inequity 101. We have some nice playgrounds in some neighborhoods and not nice playgrounds in others. And that was a very clear and stark reminder that something's up here, and I paid attention to that. So when I attended the master facility plan meetings back in the spring, one of my questions to one of the consultants was, how does your plan advance equity? How are you utilizing these incredible assets, these tangible assets to promote equity across our ward? And bless her heart, she didn't have an answer at the time, but fortunately in Ward 4, specifically in Manor Park, we are seeing the historic renovation of Coolidge High School, hundred such odd millions of dollars there, and then also the construction of New North Middle School. And it's wonderful to have those buildings. We have some Coolidge alum who are over the moon, and I celebrate that and I congratulate that. But what happens with equity is when on day one, children walk into a building with high-quality teachers, when teachers who are currently at Whittier and currently at Coolidge are confident about what their career trajectory looks like, and when parents, most importantly, are confident that those buildings are going to deliver a high-quality, loving, and exciting educational program for those kids. So when we talk about our facilities plan, we have to have an underlying commitment to equity, not just building buildings, but also leveraging those buildings in service of kids and families. And I'll be able to use my operations background as well as my instructional background and parent engagement background to ensure that our city council has that forefront, that DGS also has that at the forefront. Thank you.
Thank you to all the panelists. We are now going to transition to opening up to the audience. And just in the interest of being able to get in more questions than not, you can feel free to direct your questions to one or two specific candidates. You can sort of go from.
We're going to do a little microphone shift. Is this one? Line up. Okay.
I think I did my day.
I trust everyone will. I kindly ask that you ask a question, don't come up and make a little speech.
Okay, I am Elizabeth Davis, President of the Teachers Union. Is that loud enough? Great.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Sarah, could we use the mic?
This one's on.
I tried that, it didn't work. Thank you. Elizabeth Davis, President of the Teachers Union, and this question is for any of the candidates who choose to answer. As a teacher, high-stakes testing and a very punitive teacher evaluation system has led to high teacher turnover in the district. My question to you is, what as a state board member would you do, or what would you focus your attention on reducing the amount of weight given to test scores as an indicator of school success? And what are some of the other indicators that you would consider?
Sure, thank you for that question, Ms. Davis, and it's a delight to see you and to be part of this conversation together. So I'm going to try to pull together a couple of different responses to your question, because it's a very rich question and a really important one, and I certainly want to leave time for my colleagues also to respond. So I was thinking about this on the way over, and I think, and I know for sure, that our chancellor will play a really important role in setting the tone for how we treat, how we value, how we appreciate the people who run our schools and who teach our children and create community in our schools. So when our chancellor takes a leading role in saying, I love our teachers, and when they say it over and over and over again, that creates an environment that trickles down to our school leaders. When they say, I love and appreciate our principal, then we'll begin to see a shift in how our communities feel, the environment in which our teachers teach, and the environment in which our students learn. So all of us want our children to be in a classroom that feels warm and engaging and inviting, where students can feel like they can be their best self. Well, that happens when teachers also feel that same level of support. And that happens when principals feel that support. As I've been talking with principals, not just now, while I've been campaigning, but over many years, as I've been talking with principals, you can feel when a principal is really stressed out. So what we can do on the State Board of Education, number one, is really push this data that we're seeing around teacher retention, ensure that we get regular and transparent data around teacher retention, and then not just collect data, but then push us for action, tangible actions that are supported by teachers that increase their likelihood of staying here in the district. And I'll be happy to talk with you offline about some other ideas that I have.
I would really like to have had someone say that they really care about teachers in the last 15 years of my career. The teachers are stressed. And teachers are stressed because of the impact system. And the impact system is set up because of the statewide testing system. Teachers aren't allowed to teach. I want you to hear that. Teachers aren't allowed to teach. They became, in the last 10 years, they became test taker teachers. All right. One of the nice things about being an AP teacher is I was able to set up my own curriculum. And I didn't have, we were caring about the AP test, but I was able to teach reading and writing and concentrate on that with my students. And I wasn't feeling that kind of stress, but one of the reasons we have such a large number of teachers who leave the system is because the system is not teacher friendly. And there has to be a sea change in what's going on in DC schools in order for teachers to be comfortable and want to be teachers for, I won't say 47 years, I loved it, but for 30 years or 20 years, or to they become teachers because they want to teach. And then every obstacle is put in their way and they go someplace else. That's why the teachers leave.
So I, of course, feel strongly about supporting all educators. Again, as a former teacher myself, I know that it is certainly one of the hardest jobs to have out there. And when we have high teacher turnover, I mean, just think about all that means to the students, right? I mean, I'm thinking about this a lot personally because, quite honestly, within the last month, my own son, who's in 7th grade, has lost 2 teachers who were new to the school. So you think to yourself, well, what happened? Like, what did we do wrong to make sure that they were not successful? So I think that we need to think more about how we provide resources and training and professional development for teachers, how we work to have culturally responsive classrooms so we know that our teachers are really getting to know the student populations that they serve and really getting the skills and the tools to serve them adequately. and absolutely that we celebrate them and their successes. And this does not amount just to a test score, but we show the love and we see the joy of learning in the classroom, and that is what is celebrated.
So as a teacher, I did teach a tested subject. I had taught both 7th and 6th grade language arts. So the fear of DCCAS before and now PARC has been alive and well. And even now as a district leader, I hear the stress from teachers constantly. Some of the things that we need to do is reform impact, to spend a little bit less importance on that high stakes testing. And also we have to look at whether we should continue to use PARC in general. There's only 3 states, if you include the District of Columbia as a state, that are still using that test. Most states have gone away and started to use something else that in many cases is better liked by their teachers in the state. It's causing incredible stress for our teachers, especially ones who are judged primarily on their test scores. But something that I had the benefit of when I was a teacher was a principal who allowed me to be creative. And I tried to continue that tradition when I became a principal. And so I believed in being highly engaging, art-infused, tying things to the kids' interests, being project-based, and culturally competent. I didn't spend a single day on test prep. And yet, by the end of the year, my students had the highest 7th grade language arts scores in the entire district. In a Title I school. Not a single day of test prep. It can be done. We have to allow our teachers to be creative and trust them to teach, to get those test scores that are so important, we know, because of the government. But we can do it without being boring and spending an undue amount of time on just simple test prep.
I have a question. Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
If I understand correctly, not too long ago, the DC Council passed legislation to approve 0 to 3 early childhood development. So my question to you is, what difference do you think that would make in the success of our students as they move on up through our system? As we probably, most of us know, the dropout rate gets to be pretty high as you move up, etc., and the success rate is great. So how does it make a difference, do you think? And if so, what different kind of difference do you think that would make?
And just for those in the audience, the legislation that references 0 to 3.
Use the mic.
The 0 to 3 legislation that she's referencing was approved by the council in June. They're currently working to find funding for it, but it would be really significant new investments in early learning and healthcare for children ages 0 to 3. It would really put DC on the forefront, in fact, of anywhere in the country. And they're currently this year working to figure out how to fund it, but the bill was unanimously approved in June.
So, and well, I'm just going to use this opportunity to say that I have a legal niece and a set of twins who are 7 months old. So thinking about the 0 to 3 age group is definitely on the forefront of my mind. It is the most rich time in a child's life. Their brain is just on fire. It doesn't look like it because they're being cute, but their brain is literally on fire. So it would have significant implications in our ward, in our city in general, especially our ward with diversity of income, number one. When you get children ready for school earlier, then of course their trajectory in school is that much higher and better. So it has positive outcomes for children. Also, early childcare also has positive outcomes for working families. So when families are able to find high-quality childcare in the form of school, can you think of anything better? No. I mean, it's just amazing. So you have families who are able to get their child into childcare and also return to work. And so for single moms or single parent homes, that early learning is really important. I saw that firsthand when I worked in an early childhood environment. that when our children started school early and attended school consistently, that you saw stronger attendance patterns over the years. So one thing that we would need to do is to ensure that families have support in being able to travel to and from those programs. That would be the next step in that. So thumbs up.
Those of us who are parents are always the children's first teacher. My wife was a Head Start teacher. She taught Head Start for 25 years. And many of her students had IEPs. And I would listen to her talk every night to her assistant as they debriefed their day. And you just listen to everything that was happening with these kids who would come to her and didn't know what colors were. And by the time they left, they were ready for kindergarten. And this might be the best piece of legislation that's ever been passed in the District of Columbia, to allow not only the students be able to be part of that, but also the young parents. I've talked to a lot of young parents who are now, they take their children to the early childhood school in their neighborhood, and they're able to work, and they're able to make money. And that's a big deal for a young parent. I was a young parent once, believe it or not. And it would have been really nice. I'm not jealous that they have it now, but it would have been really nice with 5 children if they had that kind of program when I was younger. But this is a no-brainer, all right? And I hope it passes all the way up, because if it doesn't, then there should be a revolution in the neighborhoods.
I'm just going to briefly echo, I agree. I also think it's wonderful. I'm going to pass it to her.
So I was so pleased to hear an early childhood question, because early childhood education is my expertise. It's what I work in to this day. I was a school leader for an early childhood-based school. I'm the director of early childhood education for a charter district here in DC, the highest performing early childhood program in DC as of this year. And to answer your question, absolutely it would make a difference. It would make an extremely positive difference. We know, studies have shown that the more that you invest in infant and toddler and early childhood, which is 3 to 5 education, you see increased reading levels by the time they're in 3rd grade. You see a decreased need for law enforcement and prisons, as we know. And this is an amazing support to our families who maybe will not be able to afford childcare. We already have great examples of this in DC. There's organizations such as Martha's Table, the Mary Center in Petworth, that provide infant and toddler education for free to needy families. And this is exactly the type of thing that we're looking for when this legislation hopefully fully passes, so that it can be replicated across the city. It will have amazing effects for our kids.
So, in the interest of time, because we have 7 people standing and we have a hard close at 8, and we're going to have time for closing remarks, I'm going to ask that when you ask your question, you direct it to 1 or 2 candidates, just so we can get through. I know everyone probably has great answers, but we're going to just try to keep this as open. But the last 15 minutes are for closing statements. So we'll see how that goes. If there's any,
My question might just have a very brief answer. I would like all people, all 4 of you respond. Our lovely, wonderful hometown newspaper, the Washington Post, recently endorsed some candidates for public office in school board races, and almost all of those people lost. And my jaundiced view was that that was appropriate they lost, given that they weren't very qualified. Yet clearly the Washington Post writer had very much of an ideological view of what they were offering for the endorsement. So what I would like to know is if you would seek out a Washington Post endorsement for your candidacy, or would you accept it if they give it to you?
my plan B, good suggestion. We're going to do 2 questions at once, so you can all respond. So can you ask your next question, and then we'll go down the line? I will remind you.
Mine is nowhere close to that, so I don't know.
Go ahead.
My question. My life work is development of student athletes. I worked at Department of Parks and Recreation for over 25 years, and I worked at DC State Athletic Association until my recent retirement. I'd like to know what your experiences have been with working with student athletes, and also, coupled with that, talking about modernization of facilities. As we all know, 5 to 10 years ago, ball fields across the city were renovated. However, the only use could be for public schools. Charter schools were kept out. Charter schools had to play on all kinds of fields. I'm talking about high schools. Had to play on any kind of field with rocks, glass, anything you could find. While public schools that where millions of dollars were spent on ball fields lay dormant, except for use by adults who paid for those fields. These are public fields where adults are playing on. Public school kids, charter school kids didn't have to go play on somewhere else. So, 2-part question. What is your experience in working with student athletes? Secondly, what are you going to do about the inequity of charter schools not being able to use public facilities?
Okay, so you have 3 questions in your one normal allotted time. Would you seek the Washington Post endorsement? And what is your experience with student athletes and in charter schools, athletes schools?
So we handle endorsements on a case-by-case basis. In terms of working with student athletes, I've worked primarily with elementary school children, a little bit with high school children, but I certainly believe in, one, the value of athletics and social emotional health, and I believe that we should expand access to anyone who wants to get dirty on the field, playing soccer or baseball. We should certainly have a city that embraces physical health and wellness.
One of the things about the post endorsement, which wound up being a kiss of death for some of the candidates, is that, and it's very interesting because the post editorial board, sometimes it seems to me that they don't even read their own paper, right? Because like there will be articles about outside money coming into the council race or the school board race, and there'll be all these articles in the paper that are saying that's happening, and then the Post endorses those candidates. So I really have no idea. I don't think that I don't think I'd accept it. To answer the second question, I moved to Cardozo because I was coaching the girls basketball team at Cardozo while I was teaching at Garnet-Patterson. I've been a coach of all the sports except for soccer since 1976. That's just another part of what I would like to bring to the Board of Education. I'm in the DC Coaches Hall of Fame as a coach, and I'm probably more well known as a coach than I am as a teacher. As far as the fields are concerned, the interesting thing about the fields is that was all set up really before the charter schools had teams. And now that's a real problem that has to be addressed, because it's not fair to the charter school athletes to be playing on fields that aren't acceptable.
I would say as far as endorsements go, the endorsement that I'm seeking is that from each and every one of you in here to vote for me December 4th. As far as working with student athletes, I have in the past, when I was teaching in high school, had the opportunity to work with the girls step team, which was an amazing experience, as well as working with girls on the run. And I am a runner myself, so that's a nice activity to share with student athletes. And I absolutely believe that we should expand the access so the fields in our facilities are available to all of our students that want to take and use them.
In answering the first question, I believe in candor. So I would accept the endorsement of the Washington Post if it were given to me. Part of that, to be full disclosure, I was the Washington Post Principal of the Year in 2016, so I have a relationship with the newspaper, and I think it would look strange, or it wouldn't look honest if they were then trying to endorse me and I said, oh no, it would seem dishonest. So I'm going to be honest, I would accept their endorsement if they were to give it to me. I don't know that they're doing endorsements for our race, however. As far as athletics go, my involvement with student athletes, believe it or not, I was the coach of our cheerleading team. I was a competitive cheerleader in college, captain 3 years. We also won a few championships while I was the captain. Very proud of that. You might not know that looking at me. But we were, and my middle school girls, it was all girls, they were a great team. As far as charter schools being able to use the fields, they absolutely should be able to use the fields. We know that athletics are often a pathway to paying for college for our students. I work with Friendship Public Charter School. We have some of the most money given in athletic scholarships for high school students in the entire District of Columbia. One of the events I'm involved with is our signing day, in which those students choose the college that they're going to accept their full ride scholarship to, based on athletics.
Thanks, and I just want to reiterate the question, pastors, if you can get to the question promptly, that would be appreciated, and the panelists are doing a good job of handling multiple questions and just keeping in mind of time and the line, so thank you.
I have a general question. I have a daughter who is a teacher in Columbia, Maryland. And she's under, and with the other teachers, under tremendous stress, just because of the teacher of the workload. And the issue of violence comes up with her, and especially in DC, we have a lot of violence. And I wonder how you would handle the issue of gun violence in the school system, and whether or not you feel that teachers in the school system should carry guns. Could you address that, please?
I can tell you, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sure. I have another very different question. So the Powell community and neighborhood around here has a lot of Spanish-speaking families, and I was going to ask, what do you want to do during your term on the board for Spanish-speaking kids who struggle on testing, parents who speak Spanish and really don't speak English, new students who arrive mostly speaking Spanish, and our school dual language programs? Thank you.
Going back to the gun violence question, I can say that when I was a teacher, I remember vividly sitting through my first active shooter training in a faculty meeting and leaving that training to drive home to turn on the radio to hear about what was happening at Virginia Tech. So it's real, and how teachers feel about it is real, and then engaging in these trainings with your students. Unfortunately, the world that we're living in today, but I think that what we can do is make sure that we're providing adequate resources and abilities for people to have these conversations and to plan in these ways. And hopefully we won't be in a situation where we're dealing with an incident. As far the next question,
Should teachers carry guns?
oh no, I do not believe that teachers should carry guns. Sorry, I forgot that part of the question. The next question was specific to this school, I believe, and the Spanish-speaking population of families that are in the neighborhood. And as far as supporting families, I happen to be an ESL teacher. That is what my master's degree is in, and I've spent my career working with families, immigrant families, and supporting them in multiple ways. Some of those ways include providing programs for families to learn English, providing programs for families to become more incorporated in their school communities and learn more about the education that their children are having, and including digital literacy programs and other ways to bridge that divide.
Okay, so gun violence in our neighborhoods, not only in Southern Maryland, but in Washington, D.C., of course, is a problem. It's not a problem that's going to be solved just with this, obviously, the State Board of Education. It's a community-wide, it's a DC-wide problem. We have to solve it as a DC family, involving all the way down to the ANCs, Ward, and of course working with the Metropolitan Police Department. As far as should teachers carry guns, no. And if you ask 99% of teachers do not want to carry a gun, period. That should not be their responsibility, that should not be their burden. We have resource officers at many of our schools who carry weapons. Unfortunately, that has become a requirement, but the teachers themselves do not need to be carrying guns and are not trained to do so. I know that I did not want to carry a gun as a teacher or a principal. For our Spanish-speaking families, it's not just Spanish-speaking families that we're supporting. In DC, we're also supporting a lot of families who speak Amharic, maybe Ethiopian, Vietnamese. I know I had all three of those languages at my school. I think that one of the things that we need to do is, it was mentioned with the dual language programs, adding preference for families if they only speak one language, which happens to be present in our dual language program, whether that be, for instance, Spanish or French, giving them a preference to be able to attend a school that has a dual language program so that they will have full access to teachers and administrators who would be bilingual in their home language.
I was 4.5 years in the Army. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I don't think that there should be any guns in the schools, period. Cardozo, in 1994, we had a shooting on the front steps. A student was killed. The next day, security in DC public schools changed forever. So all the security that you see in DC public schools now started the day after Antar Hall was killed on the steps of Cardozo. It's a safe school now. So that's the important thing. Students need to know that they're coming to school and it's going to be safe. We can't control the neighborhoods, we know that, but the schools are safe. And another thing about Cardozo, when we moved into the new Cardozo, we started an international academy, which is focused on students who can't speak English at all. I don't know if you're aware of that, but almost half of the students at Cardozo start in the International Academy. And it's a really good model for this kind of a situation that we're talking about.
I sympathize with your daughter who is feeling tremendous stress in her school and in the neighboring community because of violence. I'm a DC native, and so I'm familiar with violence in ways that none of us want to be, certainly not one for our children. As a school leader in Anacostia, we certainly had several incidents related to gun violence that were very concerning to us. So in response to that, I actually went out into the community and strengthened the school's relationships because we see it as a community concern. In fact, we unfortunately lost a parent last year, and the next weekend there was a community meeting that was really well attended, and I was really fortunate to be in the audience to help solve that problem. So no, we should not have guns in schools, and as State Board of Education members, we can be leaders in minimizing the violence that in any way impacts our families. Safe travel to schools is a huge priority, as you'll see from my literature, and so developing relationships with NPD will be one of my first priorities as a State Board member, because getting to school is the first step, and getting to school safely is extremely important for all of us. we have some strong models for supporting our English language learners. So as a state board member, I've already reached out to members of our Spanish-speaking community to understand their concerns. And I'm really happy to say I attended a parent-teacher, a PTA meeting that was conducted primarily in Spanish, and it was fully present. So you can count on me to be an advocate for English language learners.
So we have 4 questions left. We're going to 2 rounds. We're going to change the rounds to 1 minute to respond to 2 questions per round, and then we'll have time for closing. So, thank you.
Research has proven that it takes 3 to 5 years for an administrator to turn around a school. But it seems as though in DC, we have revolving doors in reference to administrators. Each year, there's anywhere from 10 to 25 administrators that are changed within the DC public schools. As a member of the State Board of Education, what policy would you try to put forward so that this situation does not happen? And to piggyback on that, it seems as though that we have 2 undercapacity schools, high schools in Ward 4, Coolidge and Roosevelt. But yet we have 2 overcapacity schools in Ward 3, Deal and Wilson. All the kids in the city cannot go to Deal and Wilson. So what would you do as a state member of the Board of Education to sort of shift those students who live in Ward 4 to attend their neighborhood schools?
I'm not asking an information question, I'm asking an ask. So basically all you have to do is just say yes I will or no I won't. There is an urgent crisis. It will be of relatively short duration perhaps. I'm kind of putting it in Rhonda's lap because she mentioned the North Ward 4 middle school that's coming up. That consolidates a number of educational campuses. This consolidation has some really serious implications coming right now. One is it takes away accessible, walkable schools, neighborhood schools of right, particularly for the LaSalle Bacchus community and for the Wrightwood community. DCPS has not been able to come up with any solution for transportation. I know that there's a mid-level person working on that who has had no response at all from WMATA or anybody else along that line. We also have an issue of teacher churn and turnover. Wrightwood already lost its middle school teachers because they were afraid of their job security. And you had mentioned that ideal of children moving into a school with teachers coming with them who understand them, who know them, who help them create a new school community. I am not aware of that happening at McFarland. I could be wrong, but I'm not aware of that happening at McFarland. And as far as Whittier and the schools that will be moving in, all we're hearing is what the mascot will look like and what the name of the school will be. So, whether or not you win this election, do I have your commitment to support us in this very urgent situation? Yes or no?
Absolutely, and what we've been doing on that concern, number 1 is asking DCPS a number of times to be partners in planning. So we have members who are coming to the Manor Park Citizens Association to speak about the plan for Coolidge, for New North Middle, and specifically for those teachers. So I'm really happy to say, well, I guess I can't say happy because we haven't gotten the answers that we're looking for, but I want to convey my commitment and my dedication to this issue for over 4 or 5 months now. So the answer is yes. Oh, right. So principal turnover is certainly a concern. I agree that it takes about 3 to 5 years to execute your strategy and to turn the school around, or even just to grow the school the way that you want it to be. So I would advocate for longer tenure. When we hire our principals, we should make a strong indication that we trust them, and trust is indicated by longer tenure.
I think that the consolidation of the educational campuses needs to be talked about again, because sometimes these decisions are made not by educators, and I think that the problem that we're having in the city is that a lot of the policies are made by people who aren't educators. That's why I think that the State Board of Education should have a lot more control over who the chancellor is. I'm all for Roosevelt and Coolidge students that live in the neighborhood, that they should go to Roosevelt and Coolidge. We have students traveling all over the city when they can go to school in their own neighborhoods. And principal retention is a major problem that's not really addressed like teacher retention is. And one way that we can do that is to have mentors for the principals.
So addressing the question that was providing support for this problem with the education campus, middle schools being consolidated and making it difficult for other neighborhoods, yes, of course I would support in that endeavor. You wanted a yes or no, so yes. As far as the principal turnover, speaking as a former principal, it is very difficult to turn around a school. It just so happens that I turned around my school from proficiency levels below 60% to over 90% in 2 years. But that's not typical. And I work with 2 former DCPS principals right now. One is back in the classroom, and one is a reading specialist, and they were both terminated as a principal just shortly after being hired because they didn't get results in their first or second year. But they will be quick to tell you that they didn't get the support that they needed. And they complained about levels being created at the top, 6-figure salaries being created at the top each year that are not necessarily supporting our teachers and our principals. And they're wondering, where is that support? And I would advocate that those salary positions be used to support school leaders and teachers.
So I would just say yes, I support you. And absolutely, we need to be mindful when working with our principals. And of course, they're telling us, they're reporting to us that they're not feeling supported and that they're under the gun. And so obviously, that's something that has to change.
Okay, we'll just do the last 3 together.
Short. Yeah. There's a huge technology issue affecting the city's largest LEA, which is DCPS. Within all wards in almost all DCPS schools, computers that are out of date, broken screens, or missing too many keys to be functional. These conditions clearly don't allow students the opportunity to learn reliably or gain comfort for part testing. This also doesn't allow teachers the ability to teach the materials they must cover with fidelity due to creative problem solving. What commitment can you personally give to work for a solution for the lack of reliable technology within DCPS schools specifically?
Hi, Democrats for Education Reform is a New York-based PAC that's primarily funded by hedge fund managers and a Walton era. What do you think of DFER, and are you endorsed by the DC branch of DFER?
My question is what would your plan be to help the development offices in the respective schools, especially the lower income schools, help the schools become more equitable? It's no secret, you all agree that there's a large inequity among the schools. Largely, or one really large reason, is because some of the more affluent schools have parents who can have auctions, who can raise hundreds of thousands of dollars. Ryan mentioned that there's some plan in one of the states to help distribute that. I can see a large pushback. If I'm in an auction, and if I'm voting on a piece of pottery and I pay $1,000 for it, I'm going to have some problems sending a part of that $1,000, to another school. Although I think that school should be have resources. So my question is what would your plan be to help some of the lower achieving schools help their parents develop and raise money. I mean, I can remember when I was in school, and it was a lower income school, and our parents sold dinners, and they made a lot of money, and they were allowed to allow us to get certain books and certain uniforms for our schools. And so the schools, the parents on the other side of the river, which is where they are, they have resources, they have talents, they just don't have the checkbooks to do that. So I think that the school system should help them develop those ways. What would your plan be?
Technology.
The technology is something that the Board of Education needs to get into the schools to understand. I think that we had that same problem, we mentioned it already, at Cardozo as far as the park testing is concerned. But that's why the State Board of Education needs to be proactive. When I'm elected, I want to push the State Board of Education to get out of the offices and get into the schools. As far as Democrats for Education Reform is concerned, I think all of the other candidates got a questionnaire. I didn't get one. And so I'm not endorsed by them, nor would I want to be. And as far as equity in schools, there has to be a whole mind shift in house, because what the question was about raising funds for dinners and things like that. But a lot of parents in low-income schools, that's the school that I came from, they don't have income to share at all.
Sure. I am aware of the technology gaps in our schools, and I see that we've been pushing the appropriate person in DCPS to get a response, and so far that has not happened, as much as I have been informed. So my response would be to request that someone from the tech team there, the person who manages technology, would actually do a walkthrough with our schools so they can see firsthand the status of the tech equipment, and then come up with a plan collaboratively, and then hold them accountable for that. About DFER, yes, I was endorsed by the Democrats for Education Reform. And for the question about the PTA and the budget, it's a tricky one. Number one, though, I would not underestimate the commitment that families have to raising funds. So people might assume that because a parent attends or their child attends a school that has a high population of low-income children, do not, and I will be very colloquial, do not sleep on them, because I observed students and families raise tens of thousands of dollars where other people thought they wouldn't raise $1. So let's keep that in mind. But I think the answer really is to push our DC City Council to increase our budgets, as I mentioned earlier, so that our at-risk funds can be used at risk.
I did mention technology issues earlier, talking about inequities, so I'm definitely committed to continuing with that work with you. I was not endorsed by DFER. As far as working with families, I think we need to think about working in partnership with families, and schools and families together can do amazing work, and yes, even start to raise some funds. But it starts with building relationships, and that takes time, and it starts with the leaderships in the building, making sure that they let their teachers know that that's a priority for them, and provide adequate training so they know how to get to know their families, and then also help families get to know each other.
In response to the technology issue, often we talk about budgets, do we need to increase budgets? The actual answer to that is that we don't need to increase our budget. We need to have less wasteful spending. DCPS and charter schools alike are having these extremely top-heavy central offices, new six-figure salary positions being created every year that I struggle to find out what they do for our children each day. where that money can be spent on bettering our technology, increasing staff in the schools that are working directly with teachers and students. That is where I think that money should come from. That would be my suggestion to the new chancellor. DFER, I had never even heard of it until those articles came out. I'm not endorsed, obviously. I don't know that they reached out to anyone else up here. That's who they endorsed. And as far as the equity question, I echo what I had mentioned earlier as far as having caps and making it equitable as far as the fundraising goes. Schools like in Key Elementary in the Palisades, they have sometimes parents who, a single family will donate as much as $10,000. There are other schools that there's no way that they can compete with that. I would move, just as I said earlier, to make sure that it's equitable.
Can I get a round of applause for all of you? Thank you guys so much. I think this has been very helpful for everyone. And I want to invite each of you to make closing remarks. And also, thank you so much to Kathy, who put in so much work to plan this event behind the scenes. So thank you, Kathy.
So we discussed some really challenging and thoughtful questions this evening. And when we discuss education, we absolutely should. So I thank you for your engagement, your paying attention to this issue, because it really impacts everything that we do, and it is certainly my passion. But I want to end on a very optimistic note, because I am beyond hopeful about what we are going to do as State Board of Education members. I believe deeply in the power of education, because I know it has transformed all of our lives, and we send our children to school believing that it will continue to change their life. So I want to invite you into my vision and hope that you are inspired by a public school system that engages families and children as leaders in the education conversation, that ensures a high-quality school in every neighborhood for every single child. Imagine all the subgroups that we discussed. Every single child has access to a high-quality education with a talented teacher, a principal who delights in coming to school, and a community that infuses resources and a system that is accountable as well. So please join me in that, and I certainly seek your endorsement as well on December the 4th. Thank you.
I hope that I've given you a little glimpse of my passion for education. I started out as a rookie teacher not knowing anything, and I wound up 47 years later as someone who knew a little more than I did when I started. I really am excited about moving on to the State Board of Education. It's only a 2-year term. I didn't know if you know that or not, but we'll have another election in 2020. And so if I don't do what I've said I'm going to do, then just get rid of me. And I wanted you to know that I have been endorsed by the Washington Teachers Union, and I accept that gladly.
Again, thank you so much for having me this evening. It is my pleasure to be a DCPS graduate and be back in DC working in the education system and working for the community that has done so much for me personally. My education career started as a Peace Corps volunteer in the Dominican Republic, went to New York City, and now I'm back in DC, and I'm just thrilled to be here. Again, the issues for me are quite clear. I want to make sure that we have an equitable system for our families that includes all kids, that includes children who might be English language learners, our students that might have special needs. They all deserve a high quality education. I want to make sure that our parents have a strong voice in our policy decisions, because we know as parents that every single parent wants the best for their child. And we have to, in order to make this happen, we have to make sure that we're supporting our educators so they have all the resources and support that they need to be those rock stars that we know that they are. Thank you.
So I want to start off by saying, as I look at my colleagues here, I have a lot of hope for Ward 4, because something that was missing in a lot of our other wards during their races were people who have been committed to education their whole life, people who had actually taught in the classroom, and I'm proud that all 4 of us can say those things. I would be so humbled if I were elected your state Board of Education member. I think it's important that we have someone who has proven results in the District of Columbia. I've led a classroom to be the highest performing, I've led a school to be the highest performing, and I've led a district to be the highest performing. And I'm still working in pre-K to 12 schools to this day. I work with students and teachers and principals every single day in my day job, all around the District of Columbia. And I'm going to continue to do that for the rest of my life, whether I'm elected or not. You can count on that. But what's missing now is a leader's voice. The conversations that are happening in the Board of Education, they're looking around the room and they're wondering what a principal would say. What advice would a principal give? I want to be able to give that voice to the Board of Education.
We need to clear up. Eat the pizza and clear out.
Thank you so much.